Well, good evening to one and all. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this broadcast. Yes, it is Sunday evening, and as normal, it is our leadership masterclass. And today we have with us a powerful life coach, leadership expert, strategist, change strategist, and as well a senior pastor of a powerful church. So family, I want you to welcome with us, and I want you to be excited this evening as we host on our leadership broadcast and our leadership masterclass this evening, none other than Dr. Jeffrey Smith. Dr. Smith, we are so glad that you are with us. We're so blessed to have you with us. You are on with Pastor Manuel, Pastor Renal, and myself, and would love for you just to greet our people and just to, say a few things of what's happening on your side of the world.
It is my joy to be with you here today, and thank God for technology that allows us to remain connected even during times like this. And certainly glad to be on with my fellow pastors here. It's good to see your faces and to hear your voices. I always enjoy my time there in South Africa, being able to be with you. And to my dear friend, Pastor Adrian, thank you for making this opportunity possible for me to join and just glean from you all, share with you all, and just help encourage and strengthen one another during these critical times that we are navigating through. And of course, to our wonderful leader, Bishop Lazarus, what a tremendous person he is, not only as he leads and continues to undergird all of those that look to him for leadership there, but he's been a blessing to my life, and I thank God for his friendship also. We, like everybody else in the world, are just trying to navigate our way through this crisis. And I'm happy to say that in terms of my family and the church, God has been good to us. His faithfulness has not failed us. Family is safe and healthy. They're strong. The church is doing remarkably well. People are staying connected, staying faithful, continuing to serve. Not only in community, continuing to give generously. So I'm just grateful to God that he is with us every step of the way. In terms of our nation, it's an interesting time. There are a number of states that are beginning to reopen businesses and reopen restaurants and various places of gathering. And so it's a little bit of a tumultuous time as some states are moving in that direction. Other states are kind of holding off, concerned about safety, concerned about a resurgence of the virus. So here in the United States, it's an interesting time. Our unemployment, over 30 million people have applied for unemployment. So unemployment is at a record high. People are concerned about food. Food lines are very long, and our food banks have been overrun with high demand. So interesting times here in the United States, as it is in many parts of the world. But I believe in the midst of it, God's doing something unique with his church and with his people. And we're seeing the church have perhaps the greatest influence and impact that it's had in quite some time. So in it all and through it all, we are grateful here today.
And we are grateful to have you, and we hear what you have to say in terms of just relating what's happening in the US. And yes, the mirror image of it is the same here in South Africa. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety in the atmosphere. But as you have said, the Church of God has arisen to a greater level of influence and impact in this time. And even though we're doing it a little bit differently, we can see the Church of God advancing. So I want to just have Pastor Manuel and Pastor Renal just greet the family online. And then after that, we're going to get into our teaching this evening.
Thank you, Pastor Adrian, for the opportunity. And it's so great to be connected with you, Dr. Jeffrey Smith. Looking forward to tonight's session. Every time that you've come to minister at the church or speak to us as leaders, even on a one-on-one, it's been a great blessing and encouragement and strengthening to move us forward. So we look forward to that. Strength to you tonight. Looking forward to what you have to share with us.
Amen. Good evening, gentlemen. So great to be with you tonight and great to be with everybody that's connecting with us online. Excited for what the Word of God will inspire us into tonight. So God bless you. And let's go ahead and have fun in the presence of God. Amen.
Thank you, pastors, and it's always good to have you with us on the broadcast. And to everybody watching again, thank you for coming online. We will engage with you. We will talk with you. We're asking you to prepare your questions already for Dr. Smith a little bit later. But please do share our broadcast. The more we share it, the greater the impact will be, the influence will be, the more people we can reach as well. So Dr. Smith, we're going to give you a time now. And the teaching this evening, the theme around our teaching is this: leading courageously in times of crisis. So Dr. Smith, we hand over to you.
Thank you again, gentlemen, and glad to be on with everybody that is participating in this format here tonight. As was already mentioned, these are unique times, and we hear that over and over again. These are unprecedented times. And what's interesting about it is that this crisis, the virus, is only one dimension. As we look at things, we begin to see that we are dealing with and we are confronted with a number of things all at the same time, right? So we have the concern around our health with the virus, but also then that has triggered a number of other things: economic situations, the need for food in areas where food is not getting to. It has changed the way that we do life. We're not able to go back and forth like we're used to, and our transportation is different. Here in the States, schools are closed, so kids are at home, and now families are having to navigate, family life in a different way. For many families, both the husband and the wife are at home, having to telework, or their business is closed, or their office is closed. And so now the families are in close proximity for extended periods of time. So that's another set of challenges. We think perhaps for those of us that have parents who are elderly, we're concerned about their safety and their well-being as well. As we think about this extended time of being in isolation and physical distancing, concerns around depression begin to rise, and mental illness begin to rise, and the potential for people to revert back to unhealthy patterns of living, whether it's addiction or whether it's abuse. What I'm trying to say is that we're dealing with a myriad of situations in this crisis. And as we look at this crisis, I think it's important for us to note that in the midst of crisis, although it is multifaceted and multidimensional, that in crisis, there is always opportunity. There is always opportunity. As a matter of fact, when you look at the word crisis, it means danger and opportunity present at the same time. And so I think it's interesting that as we look at this time, that we get a proper perspective. So first point that I want to offer, or idea that I would like for you to consider, is simply this: sight determines your level of leadership. Sight determines your level of leadership. I think in life you find that there are people that have different kinds of perspective or sight. Let me give you a couple of thoughts. Hindsight. Hindsight produces or provides understanding for what has happened. We have those people that are able to look back maybe on a situation or look back at an event, and they're able to give hindsight. They're able to analyze or process what has happened and give us greater understanding. You have people who have insight. Insight's different than hindsight. Insight provides understanding into the present. So you have people that are able to give you insight. They can make sense of the different components and the different facets or factors that are in a present situation. So you have hindsight, you have insight, but then you have foresight. Those individuals that are able to forecast or predict or be able to get a glimpse as to what is on the horizon that we need to prepare for. Hindsight, insight, foresight. But then the fourth and perhaps the greatest is oversight. Oversight. Oversight provides understanding from a higher level, not just looking back, not just looking at the present, not looking at the future, but oversight gives you an epic view where you're able to have an understanding of all three. As leaders, I believe God positions us to not only have hindsight, insight, and foresight, but oversight. This is what he told Jeremiah, right? In Jeremiah chapter 1, he says, "See, I have set you over nations and kingdoms." He was letting him know that he was giving him oversight, a position of leadership and authority. I believe it's important that as we go through these times in which we are navigating through the different challenges, that we believe God for oversight as leaders. So let me break that down just a little bit further. There are two kinds of leaders that begin to emerge in a crisis situation. First are those that see obstacles, those that see obstacles. Second are those who see opportunities. Those that see obstacles, those that see opportunities. Watch this. Based upon what you see, you will either become overwhelmed or optimistic. If you're the kind of person that only sees obstacles, challenges, barriers, problems, you will quickly be overwhelmed. But if you're the kind of leader that can be in the midst of crisis and look beyond the obstacles and see opportunities, you will be one that is not overwhelmed. You will be one that becomes optimistic. 2 Kings chapter 6 kind of gives us this picture, right? 2 Kings chapter 6 is the story of Elisha and his servant. And you are all preachers, so you know the story. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things here. But you remember in the story, the king of Syria sends forces down to where Elisha and his servant are. And the Bible tells us that the horses and chariots and all the men of war began to surround them. And you know the story. Elisha's servant comes out of the tent. He looks and he sees that they're surrounded. He runs back into the tent and he is in a panic. He is filled with fear and dread and terror. And he says to Elisha, "What are we going to do?" That's what you hear a lot of people saying at this time. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about food? What are we going to do about our jobs? What are we going to do about the virus? What are we going to do about this? And they're in a frantic, they're in a panic. They are beginning to be overwhelmed. It's interesting that Elisha's response to his servant was, first of all, fear not. He says, first of all, you got to get that fear and that spirit of alarm under control. Don't come running back in here talking to me about the problem. He says, what I want you to do is get control of your emotions, get control of your thoughts, and I want you to come out of fear. Now, notice the anecdote that Elisha prays for his servant. His prayer for his servant is that his eyes would be opened. Man, he's saying to us that the antidote for him being in panic and fear is that he did not see properly. He prays that God would open up his eyes. And the Bible says that then the servant goes back out and he sees that there are actually more for them than they are against them. I think this is a powerful principle for you and for I as we navigate this season of crisis and we attempt to lead the way that God calls for us to lead. It is the understanding that what you see impacts the way you lead. So here it is. Elisha's servant, if we were depending upon him because he only saw the enemy, all of his decision-making, all of his choices, all of his responses and reactions would have been based upon the fact that he saw an enemy that outmatched them. Elisha, on the other hand, sees from a different vantage point. He sees from a different perspective. And he sees that what's surrounding them is surrounded by something greater. His leadership thus is different. He doesn't respond with panic and fear. He responds with optimism, knowing that they are going to have the victory. I'm wanting to encourage us here today that if we're going to lead and live courageously, we have to believe God for proper sight. God not only give us hindsight, insight, foresight, but give us oversight. May we see not with eyes of fear, but may we see with eyes of faith and optimism. So in the midst of crisis, this is what I want to encourage us to think about, that crisis is the cradle for innovation. Crisis is the cradle for innovation. That in the midst of crisis is where creativity is born. That in the midst of crisis, that's where innovation emerges. So crisis is the cradle for innovation. This is what I want us to understand as leaders who have the responsibility of leading teams. The posture of the leader determines the posture of the team. Say that again. The posture of the leader determines the posture of the team. Imagine if you were on Elisha's servants' team. His posture was one of panic, fear, concern. If you're on that team, you would have caught that same perspective, mentality, attitude, mindset. You would have been biting your nails, pulling your hair, running around frantic, just like he was. But if you're on Elisha's team, you would have caught from his spirit, faith, optimism. God's going to bring us through. And so the posture of the leader determines the posture of the team. Let me give you something to think about here, that as you look at your teams and as you look at your church or your organization or your business, that, that within an organization or on a team, you'll have three specific roles that I want to make mention of. You'll have visionaries, you'll have operators, and you will have processors. Visionaries, operators, processors. The understanding that I want to leave with you is that in a crisis, those three roles respond differently to crisis. So let me give you a definition or explanation for each of these three, and let me point out how they respond. Visionaries are those who see. They are those who innovate and create. They come up with new ideas and new approaches. These are your visionaries. Operators are those who are hands-on. They are the executors. They're the ones that actually get the task or the action done. Processors are those who figure out the processes and systems, right? So in a church, let's take that context. You have a visionary. They are the ones that are hearing from God. They are the ones that God is giving insight and revelation and direction as to where we are going. But then you have in the church those that help us then put flesh on the bones, or actually help us then to figure out how are we going to do that. Whatever it is that pastor has said, or whatever it is that God has put in the heart of the leader, of bishop, of the overseer, then we say, how are we going to do that? That's when the processors get in there and they give us the systems and the processes and the strategies. And then you have the operators, those that actually carry out the task and implement the systems and processes. Watch this. In crisis, visionaries begin to emerge and they come alive because they see new ways of doing things. So in crisis, a visionary will get excited, but your operators and your processors, they will freak out in the midst of crisis because everything that they are used to doing is now disrupted. Processes don't work. Systems don't work. What I'm used to doing every day and every week, we don't do it that way anymore. So it freaks them out. We don't do discipleship the same way in this context that we did it before Corona showed up. The way that we did follow-up and assimilation is now different. The way that we do our services is now different. So our processes and our systems that we have relied on for years, and perhaps in some situations, decades, has been disrupted. Those that are used to coming in and doing their particular function in their particular department now are freaking out because things are different. So in our organizations, we have to recognize that there's visionaries, operators, and processors, and we have to deal with them differently. Let me drill down on maybe one concept here. How am I doing on time, Pastor Adrian? Am I all right?
You're still good for time. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I want to drill down then maybe on another area, and that is, I find that in crisis, it's important for us as leaders to be decisive. To be decisive. You will find in crisis, people are looking for decisive leadership. It's been interesting during this time here in the United States, watching the different governors over the states as they attempt to make decisions on how to reopen their particular states. And our president has put the responsibility back on the governors to make decisions for their respective areas. And what's been interesting is watching them in some situations make decisions, but then not have the ability to be decisive and get pushback from people and then reverse their decision. For example, in Ohio was reopening, and the governor said that anybody wanting any kind of public service had to make sure that they had a mask on before they entered any building. He thought that was the right thing to do. He thought that would keep people safe and healthy. Well, he got a whole bunch of pushback, and people were up in arms, and people were protesting. I shouldn't have to wear a mask. I don't want to wear a mask. That's not anything that I want to be restricted to. And he ended up reversing his decision. I'm finding that it's interesting that in crisis, decisive leadership is important. So I want to give you some things to think about in making decisions as a leader. I just saw my good friend, Bishop Lazarus, come on there. Hi, sir, and happy belated birthday to you. Let me give you some things to think about in making decisions. In crisis, it's important to understand that there's a difference between management and leadership. Management and leadership. If I were with you, I would draw on the board two circles, kind of like a Venn diagram. When a crisis first hits, if you think about one circle being management and another circle being leadership, when crisis first hits, those circles overlap. You're having to manage and lead at the same time. As time goes by in the crisis, you begin to see that those circles begin to separate. They will always overlap to some extent because the present impacts the future. Stay with me here. So they'll always overlap, but you'll begin to understand that in order to move your organization, your church, your business successfully through crisis, you're going to have to spend more time in the leadership circle than you do in the management circle. Let me explain to you why. Management is the side of just really looking at how do we deal with the present circumstances. It's making the immediate day-to-day choices on how we allocate resources. How do we set up new systems? When we talk about management, it is focused on the here and the now. When we talk about leadership, it's talking about the future. How do we prepare for what's next? How do we position ourselves for the new normal? It is mainly looking at how do we effectively take what we have and position it for where we are going. So in crisis, you've got to move from the management circle into the leadership circle, not allocating all of your time to the day-to-day, but beginning to make sure you set aside time to prepare your organization for where it is going. let's talk a little bit about making decisions as a leader. Our job as leaders in crisis is not to react to what is happening, but rather to lead people in light of what is happening. This is a big distinction. If you're going to be effective in crisis, you can't simply react to what is happening. You have to lead people in light of what is happening. So, first point under decisive leadership. We must practice leadership and not reactionship. Leadership and not reactionship. The difference is this: leadership has direction, whereas reactionship doesn't. Reactionship is more random in its function. Leadership has an intentionality and purposeful direction. And so we've got to make sure that as leaders, we're not reacting, we're responding because we have a sense of direction. Number two, if you're going to make great decisions as a leader in the midst of crisis and lead courageously, make data-informed decisions. Make data-informed decisions. It's interesting what it says in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 23. Know the state of your flocks. The implication here is that when you know the state of your flocks, you're able to make decisions that are in the best interest of the flock. But when you don't know the state, when you're unaware of what the challenges are, what the conditions are, then you're not able to make the right decisions. One of the things that we did, that many churches did, and that we're continuing to do, is as soon as the crisis hit, we put together a call care team. And that call care team called every one of our members within that first week. We wanted to make sure we knew how everyone was doing, particularly for those that are seniors and elderly. We wanted to reach out to them. What are your needs? What are your concerns? What are your challenges? And that informed us on what to do. Even now, after we've been in this now 5 weeks, 6 weeks, we're still calling every week to check on every person. Not only that, you think about the information that you need in terms of knowing the state of your flock, but also you think about you need to have trusted resources around you, whether it's the World Health Organization, whether it is making sure that you have communication with your government officials. You want to make sure that you have trusted voices around you to give you up-to-date information so that you can make proper decisions. Number three, make decisions for now and not forever. This is important in crisis. What we're seeing here is that things are changing, sometimes day to day, at sometimes hour to hour. Free yourself up and make decisions for now, but don't lock yourself in where you're making decisions forever. You don't have to say, we're going to do it this way and we're going to do this from now until Jesus comes back. No, we're understanding that we're having to make decisions and be flexible, be nimble, be able to adjust based upon the circumstances that present themselves at the time. So we were having to do this when the crisis first hit. I remember meeting with our team and I told the team, look, everybody's assignment has just changed. What you were used to doing every Monday, every Tuesday, every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is different. Our challenges are different. Our concerns are different. Our focus is different. And they understood that we've got to do what we need to do in this moment. We changed our budgets, things that we had allocated to have as expenses. We put a hold on some things. We put a hold on all travel. We put a hold on our capital improvements. We put a hold on some of the things that we were doing, understanding that we had to adjust based upon the situation at hand. Now that we've been in this 5-6 weeks, we've made other adjustments. We're seeing that the people have been giving generously. We haven't missed a beat in terms of finances. As a matter of fact, we are ahead of last year's budget at this time of the year. People have been generous. People have been faithful. So we made another adjustment, and some of the capital improvements, some of the upgrades that we were wanting to do, we have put those back on schedule. So make decisions for now, not forever. Point number 4, choose clarity over certainty. Choose clarity over certainty. Even when you can't be clear, and in crisis, many times even when you can't be certain, and many times in crisis, we can't be certain because things are changing, things are moving. Always be clear. Always be clear. That's part of being a decisive leader. I remember early on in the crisis, one of the things that was on the news quite often was the number of jobs that were being lost, the number of businesses that were being closed, the increased number of people applying for unemployment. Now, remember early on, I sat my team down and I wanted them to know what I knew at that moment. And that was that I didn't believe that we were in a position where they needed to be fearful for their jobs. I told them, as it stands now, your jobs are secure. As it stands now, there'll be no change in your compensation packages. You don't have to have the burden of that worry or concern. I told them that as I get information on how we are doing as we are continuing to move forward through this crisis, I will keep them aware of their status in terms of their position, their job, their compensation. I was trying to simply be clear. Now notice, I told them what I knew. I didn't tell them what I didn't know. You can only speak on what you know. We get ourselves in trouble and we lose credibility when we try to speak beyond what we know. There was a question that came up and it was something that I didn't know. I was clear with them. Look, I don't know that answer now. Give me some time to do some research, do some checking, and I'll come back with you. Or if it's something that, look, we won't know until some more time elapses, I would tell them, look, we won't know the answer to that until maybe 3 weeks from now. My point is that when we can speak clear, it causes there to be a decrease in confusion, chaos, and concern. Here we go. Leverage all 3 crisis leadership voices. This is important. In crisis, as a leader, you have to know when to use the right voice. Let me give you 3 voices. First voice is the voice of motivation, the voice of motivation. Second voice is the voice of interpretation. And the third voice is the voice of transformation. When leading a team, an organization, a church in crisis, you will need all 3 voices at different times. Motivation is that optimistic voice. It is that voice of encouragement. It's that voice that says, we're going to get through this. We're going to make it. Everything is going to be all right. God is with us. And that's a great voice to have. But can I tell you, in crisis, you cannot depend on that being your only voice. In crisis, you don't get people through crisis only by motivation. You got to use the other 2 voices. Interpretation. Interpretation says, let's make sense out of what we are facing. Interpretation gives accurate information in terms of what we're dealing with, what we're facing, what our approach is going to be to the challenge at hand. The voice of interpretation brings clarity to the moment. Thirdly is the voice of transformation. This is the voice that speaks to the future. This lets your church know, your organization know, your team know, this is where we're going. This is how we are going to be on the other side of this. This will be the change that we make. This will be the new approach that we take. This is how we'll be different as a team. This is how we'll transform as an organization. So in crisis, leverage all 3 crisis leadership voices: motivation, interpretation, and transformation. Okay? I think I'm almost at the end of my time. Let me give you just this point real quickly, and that is to say to you that leading in crisis, leading courageously, begins with you leading yourself. It begins with leading yourself. I want to slow down for a moment right here. The reality for us leaders is that we're going through this crisis like everybody else is. The challenge for us as leaders is that we're trying to help, support, and encourage others, but we're going through the same challenges just like them. We're experiencing loss just like they are. We're experiencing disruption just like they are. Some of us are grieving just like they are. Last week, I buried my uncle, 87 years of age, who died due to COVID-19 complications. We're dealing with the same challenges. My children are home from school. My oldest, who was living up in the DC area, is now at home with us. My second oldest, who came home early from college, is living with us. Our third child, who is in high school's closed now, and he's at home. We're dealing with the same challenges. So the same stresses, the same pressure that our congregants, our team members, our employees are dealing with, we're dealing with them as well. So we have to take care of ourselves. Let me give you 4 questions to ask yourself during this time to help you lead yourself properly in crisis. Number 1, ask yourself, what are my strengths? What am I uniquely gifted to do? What are my individual gifts? What are my strengths? And begin to leverage those. What are my strengths? You might ask 3 or 4 people who are close to you to give you their insights. Ask them, what are my strengths? And see what their response is. Number 2, what are my values? What are my values as a leader? What is important to me? What are my non-negotiables? What is significant to me as a leader? This is important because your values inform your decisions. You will make decisions based upon what's important to you. So, what are your values? You might ask the same question to 3 or 4 people. When you look at me, what would you say are the most important things to me? If someone were to ask you, what are my values? What would you say? Get a perspective on what your values are. Here we go. 3rd question to ask you. Leading yourself, you need to be aware. What are your strengths? What are your values? Number 3, what are your triggers? Truth be told, all of us got some triggers. All of us got some buttons that when pushed, we will act in a way that maybe is not always as Christ-like. I wish I was there with you so I could look you in your face, but I can't. So I'm just going to trust that you're agreeing with me because I know we all got some triggers, especially when we're going through crisis. You know how it is. People getting on your nerves. You've been on one too many Zoom chats. You've had one too many phone calls. You can't get any privacy. You can't get any alone time. You can't go to your favorite restaurant. You know how it is. And the pressure begins to mount. What are your triggers? What are the things that set you off? What are the things that cause you to act and to perform and behave less than your best? If you're aware of your triggers, you can control your triggers. But if you're not aware of your triggers will control you. 4th, what are your concerns? What are your concerns as a leader? What are the things that are most concerning to you? What are the things that keep you up at night? What are the things that are pressing in on your mind? Get an idea of what your most significant concerns are. This is important because if I can become aware and acknowledge what my concerns are, it'll help me in keeping those concerns from becoming fears. What I don't want is my concerns to become fears, because my fears then will paralyze my leadership. So 4 questions that you want to ask as a leader. What are my strengths? What are my values? What are my triggers? What are my concerns? 4 organizational questions that you need to ask. I'm gonna give you these real quickly and then I'm done. These are the questions that we all should be asking, whether we're a business owner, a pastor, team leader. Number one, what opportunities have you discovered during the crisis so far? This will help you shift from looking at obstacles to look and seeing opportunities. What opportunities have you discovered during the crisis so far? Certainly, there's been new opportunities that have emerged even during this time that we want to leverage. Number two, what did you used to do that doesn't make sense anymore? What are the things that you used to do before the crisis that don't make a whole lot of sense anymore under this new norm? Number three, what used to seem important that no longer seems important? One of the things I'm noticing is that the things I thought were so important really don't have the same kind of significance. You might want to ask that question. What seemed to be so important that doesn't have the same kind of significance anymore? Fourth and final question, and I'm done. What does the new normal now make possible? What does the new normal now make possible? Pastor Adrian, let me put it back in your hands. I hope that was helpful and gave us maybe some things to think about and consider, both in terms of organizational leadership and personal leadership as well.
Dr. Smith, thank you very much for the powerful teaching, the powerful insights that you've raised, as you've just said, on a personal and an organizational level. Allow us also just to take the time to share our condolences with you and your family at large with the passing of your uncle. We are praying, we will be in prayer for you and your family as well as you navigate through this time. We have a couple of questions that we would like to ask you. The first one that I have was a question on the age-old one, and I want to spin it, the one where people would ask, are leaders made or born through different things? But I want to spin that one around and ask you the question, in times of crisis, what kind of leaders are made or birthed or born? What kind of leaders are made during times of crisis?
That's a great question and a big one. That's why it's an age-old question, right? So let me give you a couple of thoughts. I think number one, both. I think leaders are both born and created. I think God sends into the earth those individuals that might have particular skill sets, personalities that lend itself to leadership. But I think also events help to shape leaders as well. I like this one. I think many times in life we find that leaders are cornered. They're cornered. That life presents circumstances in situations. God will put us in circumstances in situations where we're cornered. And the leadership that is in us has to rise, has to stand up. Yeah. David was cornered. There was a Goliath that had to be brought down. He was cornered. Paul was cornered on that road to Damascus. So I think leaders are both birthed, created, and cornered. I think that in crisis, you'll find that different kinds of leaders show up. So think about this. There are certain leaders that are built for peacetime. There are certain leaders that are built for wartime, right? So if we look at somebody like Winston Churchill, he was a great wartime leader. But if you track his leadership, he didn't do so well when it was peacetime. I think there are certain ones that are built for crisis. They're visionaries. They have a natural inclination to respond in faith and not react in fear. They have a certain disposition that looks for opportunity rather than obstacles. So I think crisis causes a certain kind of leader to arise. And I think, again, they're visionary, they're optimistic, they're faith-filled, they're decisive, they're able to be flexible and adjustable. I think that's what we see in crisis begin to emerge.
Thank you, sir. Then two more questions I have for you, and I'm going to ask you both. So the first one would be, How assertive should a leader be when implementing changes and strategies, especially in the time of crisis? And then the second one would be this. In using the three voices you spoke of, how far do you involve other voices, specifically like a team, especially in transformation? So that's the two.
Two great questions. Let me see if I can get both of them. On the first one, how aggressive should you be in implementing strategy and process? Let me kind of give us all something to think about. Leadership is about moving people forward. It's about rallying people around a cause. It's about taking them where they haven't been before. So this lets us know that leadership is about people. So I think what happens is that if we're not careful in crisis, we can get preoccupied with the challenge, with the process, with the strategy, and we forget about people. I think one of the things that determines the pace at which you move forward is whether or not you have the ability to connect with people by being empathetic, right? So let me give it to you this way. So Pastor Adrian, if you and I were on a team and the only time I heard from you is when you wanted me to do something. The only time I heard from you is when you had a new system that you wanted me to implement. You had a new strategy but you never asked me how I'm doing. You never asked me how my family's doing. You never asked me, what are you going through? You never asked me what's concerning you at this time. That is going to create a dissonance and a disconnect that will hinder your effectiveness as a leader. So I think what we have to be mindful of is that sometimes we just have to take the time to be empathetic and to be human with one another. Let it not all be about, we got to move quickly and implement this strategy. We got to hurry up and put this new system in. So let empathy temper the degree of aggressiveness you use in implementing a new strategy or system. The second question had to do with using the three voices. Is that right?
Yes, that was right. So how do you involve others, especially on the level of the transformation?
So that's an excellent question. Remember, we talked about those two circles, right? And we talked about how early on the management circle and the leadership circle are really on top of each other. We talked about over time how those circles begin to separate, and you as the leader have to make sure you're in the leadership circle more than you're in the management circle. Here's the key. In order for you to get over to the leadership circle, you're going to have to delegate responsibilities, decisions, resources to those that are in the management circle so that you can stay in the leadership circle. You cannot get mired in the operational side. You cannot get overwhelmed with all of the execution of everything on a day-to-day basis. That will limit the time that you can be in the creative space, the innovative space, the visioning space. And so that is a great question. Some of the voice communication, whether it's motivational, whether it's interpretation, whether it's transformative, you've got to make sure that you put some of that responsibility in the hands of trusted leaders to help you manage what needs to be managed so that you can lead what needs to be led.
Thank you for that answer, sir, or those answers. Two more questions, and I'm not sure if the pastors want to ask theirs as well.
Sure.
But the first question I'm going to ask you around this is, the question is being asked, what's the best way for organizations when facing a crisis to communicate so that they don't lose people, especially like in the church environment? And then number two, how do you draw a line between being very decisive and not too controlling? How do you draw a line between being very decisive and not too controlling?
Let me answer the second one. I think maybe this is a thought that as a leader, what you want to do in the organization is establish order. not maintain control. So the two are different. As a leader, I want to establish order, which is I want to let people know what is expected of them. I want them to know what they can expect of me. I want them to know what the chain of command is. I want them to know their scope of influence and responsibility. I'm setting order. That's different than trying to maintain control. When one tries to maintain control, what can happen is they end up micromanaging. Now they have to make every decision. Now they got to know every point of data. Now everything has to cross their desk. Now they have to be in every meeting. That is going to hinder your ability to be nimble and flexible as a leader. So what I want to do is establish order, not try to maintain control. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, that does. That does.
The first part of the
There's another,
question. What was the first part of that question? What was the first part of that question?
just around how do you communicate as an organization
Yeah.
when crisis hits the people, you don't lose people, especially from a church environment.
So one of the things that we did as a team when our offices had to close because there was government regulation that groups of greater than 10 could not meet, we had to go into a telework environment. And I remember meeting with our team and we walked down through what that was going to mean for us. And one of the things we talked about was communication. And we put some things down, one of which was, whenever possible, let's communicate face to face. So if that is, one or two of us or three or four of us have to meet at the church to do something, let's do that. If that means we have to create a FaceTime or a Zoom chat, let's do that. I think it's important because when there is distance, things get distorted, right? So we all know that a large part of communication is nonverbal. So if I'm talking to you and it's only in a text format, I lose a lot of nuance. I lose a lot of feeling. I lose a lot of interpretation of what is really going on. So as a team, what we strive to do is communicate face to face as much as possible. With our top tier leaders, we try to communicate face to face as much as possible. So we do a lot of Zoom chats. We do a lot of conference calls, particularly for those on the call care team. I'll get together with them once a week or once every other week. For those that are leading small groups, we do individual meetings as well as group meetings face to face because it's critically important. However, you can't do everything by way of face to face. Some things you've got to do by way of text or email. We made the decision that if we can't do it face to face, we'll do it text. Text seems to be a little bit more personal than email. Things that probably are the least critical, we will use email. If it is very critical, we'll use face to face. So we try to graduate our communication based upon the critical nature of the communication or information that needs to be shared. I hope that gives some understanding.
Yeah, it gives some direction. Pastor Manuel, do you have a question?
No, Pastor Adrian, I'm just listening and chewing on what Dr. Jeffrey Smith is sharing. Maybe I can just highlight the last answer Dr. Jeffrey made, which is a vital communication strategy that is very clear in how to manage the severity of the communication that you need to communicate. So I think sometimes the mistake we make is we want to use one method of communication across for everything. And the severity of the critical nature of what needs to be addressed in what you just said seems to determine how the communication needs to happen. That really helps a lot.
Especially, Pastor Manuel, if you know you're going to have a conversation and you know there's going to be a difference of opinion, or maybe the potential for conflict is high, we do not do that over text or over email. That is just a recipe for problem. if there's going to be the potential for conflict, a difference of opinion, we'll make sure that we try to do that face to face, because so much of communication is nonverbal. The flip of the eye, the sigh, the arms folded, somebody sitting back in their chair. You can get so much from that that a text will not convey, right? You can read the same word in a text and in your mind come up with a different interpretation than what the person put. A person can respond right. You can see that as agreement, or you can see that as sarcasm, right? So what we try to do, again, if there's the potential for conflict, if there's the potential for the difference of opinion, let's do face to face.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I'd asked Pastor Reynolds if he had a question. He said he'll won't ask the question now because we have a few moments left with you. So we'd love for you to take your final reflections on this and just a word of encouragement through it all.
Yeah. You know, I again appreciate Pastor Adrian and Bishop Lazarus, your wonderful wife sitting there next to you, I see as well. Pastor Reno and Pastor Manuel for inviting me to be a part of this. I find that you don't want to go through crisis alone. That if we can partner with one another, if we can walk together with each other through the crisis, it makes this season much easier to navigate. I want to say as well that this time in which we're in is an incredible opportunity for us as leaders and for our churches. You know, I think about the scripture where it talks about there that Jacob, that night he had that dream and he saw the ladder, and there were some ascending and there were some descending. I think in crisis it's the same way. There are leaders that will ascend and there'll be leaders that descend. There are people that had influence or had notoriety that during crisis may not show to be the kind of leader that we thought they were, and they'll descend. However, there'll be individuals that maybe we overlooked or maybe we underestimated, that in this environment, they will ascend. I want to encourage everybody on the call, let this be a time where we ascend. One of the things that we're doing in our midweek Bible study, I'm teaching on growing in adversity. I think adversity puts a demand on us and causes us to grow in a way that times of leisure do not. In adversity, something begins to call upon our creative ability, our innovation. Something begins to call upon us that we begin to stand up to the situation and the challenge at hand. It's interesting, in Psalms 92, it says, the righteous shall flourish like a palm tree, and they shall grow like the cedars in Lebanon. What an incredible word picture. Palm trees and cedar trees. Palm tree, we can picture that, and you guys have palm trees there. We don't have any palm trees where I'm at, but we know palm trees are able to withstand harsh winds, hurricane winds. Watch this. They bend, but they don't break. I think that speaks to how a palm tree is able to flourish even in adversity. I think it's true for us as well, that in the midst of adversity, we have the opportunity to grow. Last verse I want to give you, and that is simply this. Out of Hebrews chapter 10, it tells us, do not cast away your confidence, because with it there is great reward. I just want to encourage everybody, don't cast away your confidence. I know these are tough times. I know these are difficult moments that we're walking through. I know sometimes it's easy to feel like giving up, to feel like quitting, to feel like, I don't know if we're coming out of this. I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know if I'm going to still have a church after this is all over. I don't know if I'm still going to have any people. All those questions can flood our mind at times through this whole season. But I want to encourage you, don't cast away your confidence, because with it, there's a great reward. I believe on the other side of this, we're going to see great reward individually, and we're going to see great reward collectively, because God's faithfulness will not fail us in this season.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. Thank you very much for your insightful, clear and concise teaching this evening. We are extremely grateful for that. Bishop is on the line, to those that have just tuned in and watching us as well. So Bishop, any parting words from your side?
Well, I want to say thank you to everyone that's been listening and everyone that's been watching. And I'm trusting God that in these platforms that we have set for the church and our community, I'm trusting God that they will be growing and they are not dying. Because at this time, a whole lot of things can happen. Our people can either grow, our people can either become slothful and lukewarm, because sometimes if they don't connect, and if they don't connect to vision, and if they don't connect to the word that is being set for them, we will have a whole group of people, a group on the right-hand side that will be growing in the things of God and waiting with expectation to be in the house of the Lord. And then there will be another group that we've got to work with such great effort to bring them out of the pit of lukewarmness. So I'm trusting that all of our people are really growing in God. And we can give them a whole lot of word. It is for them to take that word in their quiet time and chew upon it and digest it like a cow would do, eat up the green grass and go into a little corner and it will chew on its cud. I'm trusting that our people will take down the notes, and we have put on our platform great speakers like Dr. Sam Chan, Jeffrey Smith, and others that have come on our platform. And at this time, we can't travel. And at this time, we are getting these great men of God who are our covenant partners of Siloam to come on board and give us a word of encouragement, how they are going through trying times. And I want to say thank you to Bishop Jeffrey Smith for his covenant relationship to both Neela and I, and to our leadership, and to the family of Siloam. I want to say thank you for your covenant relationship. And I thank you for the input that you had with all of us tonight. And I know by listening to the word of God that we are going to personally grow, and we will be able to navigate the ship through the storm and come safely onto the other side, looking steadfastly to Jesus, who is the author and the finisher of our faith. So I want to say to Bishop Jeffrey, thank you. Well done. I've listened to part of that. I'm going to download the rest. And I know you have a whole lot of spiritual wealth on the inside of you. We need to tear you up and we need to dig into your mind. And we know that you have made a great deposit into South Africa this evening. God bless you, and God bless my sons.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you very much. Dr. Smith, thank you very much. Pastors, thank you very much. Thank you for joining. And again, Dr. Smith, we are covering you and your family as well as Strong Tower in prayer. And we know that God will do great and mighty things for you. So to the rest of you, thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for your messages. And thank you for your questions as well. Please keep on the lookout for what we do here at Siloam on our different campuses, on our different social media sites. And we want to connect with you, communicate with you. We want to cover you. And you must know that we as a church, we love you, we care for you, and we'll continue to pray for you. So thank you for joining. Thank you for being a part of this. Amen.